Hello, and welcome to Your Estate Matters with your hosts, my colleague Greg Brenand and myself, Nicole Garten of Heritage Trust.
Your Estate Matters is a podcast dedicated to everything estates, including building and preserving your legacy.
If it's estate related, we'll be talking about it. We're having the conversations today that will help Canadians protect their families, their assets, and their legacies tomorrow. Thank you so much. With us today is professional organizer Linda Chu. Linda, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Nicole, Greg.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into organizing.
Well, a couple of decades ago, I was in the hotel restaurant industry, and the cause of my demise was 9/11. So after 9/11, nobody wanted to get on a plane. So the industry, the hospitality industry, didn't tank, but it certainly was quite depressed. So having lost my job at that time, now what was the scenario? So I knew what I loved about, and back then it was almost 20 years in the hotel industry as well. I love the training aspect of it. I love the systematization of everything. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week business. So it doesn't run without a myriad of systems that had to be in place at all hours for all shifts. So that's what I loved about the work that I did, of course, with the people and such as well. So having left the industry, it was what could I do that could take those skill sets? And then that's when it was a friend actually who found the Professional Organizers Association. Had no idea what the term was. And then as I did more and more research, I realized, wow, this is an industry that I could certainly sink my teeth in.
Oh, amazing. So what are the current demographics of clutter and inheriting your parents' items?
The reality is, I mean, statistics have it that by 2036, Statistic Canada indicates that it estimates that 25% of the population will be 65 or older. So that is like 4 times, or is it 6 times, I think, the population as it was in the 60s with that. So with that amount of aging, you're also dealing. So think about your parents, your grandparents, et cetera, maybe yourself as empty nesters. You're no longer in need of those larger homes. And in those homes, the more rooms you have, the more stuff you tend up collecting. So it's that volume, that massive amount of volume that the kids these days they don't want. I have a presentation that I do that's called "Your Kids Don't Want Your Stuff," and never more so than in this situation. It's all the tchotchkes, the Royal Dalton figurines, and all the fireplace mantle all full of every piece of ornaments and things that you've collected, collect your spoons, you name it. So it's barely at the tip of the iceberg, I think.
Linda, what do you do if a loved one dies and you're left with a home filled with personal belongings?
Well, what do you do? Depends on who you are. Are you the executor? Are you family members or perhaps friends that are engaged? So first and foremost, I think I know is the will. If there's a will, there's oftentimes there is no will, and we ensue with the search of finding the will. But it's really looking at where the assets are willed to. So that is that first layer that anybody who is going into an estate is to really look at what does the will require you to do. So what assets, what belongings, what physical items that one has to extract from that first layer. And then whomever is managing the estate is then really looking at that next level. It's not necessary, but quite often, more often than not, it's looking at which family and friends do they allow into the home to extract that next layer. And then what is left is the hurdle. What do you do with all of those belongings? And it's then educating yourself around what to do, what services to use. And more often than not, again, people are really concerned. This is good stuff. Someone paid money for it, or there's got to be a way to rehome it. So then there goes the battle in how to rehome it, what to donate, what is recyclable, and try to look at pushing, for lack of a better word, all of these possessions out into the marketplace, which is very flooded right now.
So break it down for us. You've got a house full of stuff. What are your first tasks?
As I mentioned earlier, the first thing is what is in the will. So whether it's jewelry, whether it's just it could be the sofa, it could be the china cabinet, it could be certain collections in the home. So those are the first things that need to be identified and put aside. Then it's also then looking at documentation. So before anything is removed, bagged, and boxed, it's going through the entire home in search of perhaps legal, financial, all the other documents that may point to the value of the estate because the will isn't always clear. And sometimes people don't indicate what bank accounts they have, what investments that they have. So sometimes going through all of a household full of papers may shed light. So we're not there to question whether there is a value in terms of a particular document, but we're there to certainly look at here's a financial document, or here's something that may lead to a particular value to the estate. So we'll place all of that aside. So once the will is taken care of, the perhaps documents that might lend in that direction is removed or set aside. Then it's really looking at who else needs to come through or that you would like to come through to have a choice of the belongings in the home. Not everybody wants to go in that direction. And then again, the final steps are what can now be done? What is donatable? Perhaps there is a consignment or resale value of some of the items there. So then it's about the arena of cost recovery. It's 100% you know that there's a cost involved in removal services and in engaging in our services, for example. But what activities can you engage in that will mitigate some of those costs so that your net costs are ultimately lower or as low as you can get to?
So, Linda, when would you say that you actually need to call in an expert?
It's about the level of overwhelm with that. You don't need to call in the experts. You can do this yourselves. But who is you? You who are working full time, you who have children, activities, you may have another aging parent that you're dealing with. So, do you have the time and the wherewithal and the interest to even add this? It's not like it's a 24-hour thing or a few weekend thing. It can be a huge, huge endeavor to go into um, a lifetime. We're talking decades of a lifetime of acquisition of a homeowner and going through that entire life. So it is a huge responsibility. So it's around what time and will are you able to apply to this task?
As a follow up to that, Linda, may I ask, do you deal with a lot of executors or family members that are not resident
Yes.
locally?
Yes, we do. So we do both. So they're not all living here. We had more often, a family is out of town, out of province. It could be even out of country, and then it's also trying to communicate with all families of interest. So what if you're in a household that have 6 siblings? And we've done that, and we're talking. I had one with 11 siblings, in fact. So you're dealing with 11 siblings. They don't all live across the street. They're in, different cities, different countries, different time zones, and then everybody has a finger pointed in many different directions in terms of what they want or what they feel should happen, unless it's really clear in the will, and often it's not.
So, someone's faced with a house full of stuff. How do they choose a professional organizer to help them?
I would recommend meeting with people and really ask questions and listen. It's very telling when you engage in a conversation with somebody to see what their process is, to see it's not just a resume of how many years they've been in business for. It is because experience does lend to the availability and the ability of that individual to have certain resources around them because it's not a one person deal. It's about engaging in the removal services. Maybe you have a piano. What about jewelry? What about stamp collection, coin collections? There's so many collections within a home so that there are many professionals that need to be connected into this estate to be able to educate the executor in terms of what is the best direction that they need to take for them and the goods and the wishes of the deceased.
I have two questions, Linda. One is, do you ever get involved before an estate?
Yes, often we do. Half the battle is the possession, always is. So, I would recommend, rather than leaving it to your heirs to deal with, if you can start early. I always say that for every decade of life that one is on this earth, if you were to deal with the possessions, it's about a week on average. And that factors in the rabbit hole of emotions that, one picks up something, you open up a photo album, and there goes the emotional journey that you go through. So to go through that process, and that's exactly what is happening. The difficulty is everything in that home has a memory attached to it. So that when the homeowner picks up something, it's really going through such and such gave it to me. Oh, I remember this trip. And so it's going through all of the stories. That's why it's so time consuming. So think about working with your parents again or your grandparents. It's not about, Mom, when was the last time you used this? Out it goes. That would be easy. But it never is. It's around, yeah,
Mhm.
but I paid good money for it. Oh, I remember your dad and I went on the trip. So it's going through that memory lane. And that is part of the process. Part of the process is to sort of reintegrate the individual through that experience and then talking them through and a little bit of a tug of war in terms of helping them to realize does this item have a significance, and especially when they're downsizing, they're
Mhm.
going into a home half the size, a quarter of the size. So if you're going from a house to a care facility, you could very easily go from like a quarter of the size, if not smaller. So from that, using that as fractions, half the space, at least half of your possessions, and then you're dealing with possessions of scale that's going to fit into your new home.
And what are the costs and what are the types of costs?
The types of costs. So in addition to our costs, you're looking at really about the size of the team and the volume of the possessions that one has in their home and how long it's going to take to navigate all of those emotions. That has a huge impact on the bottom line cost. But on average, you're probably looking between 2,500, 3 grand a day. But you're looking at what, 24 man hours, 32 man hours in that one day. So it can be pretty efficient with a larger team rather than one by one. But in addition to our cost, it's all of the other auxiliary services. It's the removal cost. It's the cleaning cost. It's a piano just to get a piano out of the home. Even if it's taken away for free, in order to get it out safely from the home, you're needing professional movers to come in. It's at least $300 to $500 just to get a piano, even though it may be destined to the
Mhm.
landfill, of which 3 or 4 pianos a month go to the landfill, I have to say. Really, really hard to rehome, especially used ones. But you're looking at removal costs. Every company is a little bit different. A removal company will take away donations as well as recycling and rubbish. But their costs are, if you're looking at sort of a cubic yard, so think about the volume of a stove, which is 30 by 30 by 30. A cubic yard is 36, in fact. So if you're looking at that type of volume, it's about $80, $90 per cubic yard to get
Mhm.
items moved out and rehomed or to the transfer station. So if you're thinking about filling a truck, what size is the truck? So easily 800, 1,000, $1,200 to
Mhm.
get truckloads of possessions out. So you think about a home, how many truckloads is it going to take to empty? So it could be in the thousands. So I talked earlier about cost mitigators. What are some of these activities that you can take on that can mitigate some of those costs? Where are charities that will come and pick up for free if that's available to you? And it's also around a timeline. Based on your timeline, depending on how tight it is, you may not have the ability to use those free or low cost services. So time is either your friend or your foe. The more time you have, the more ability to engage in some of those no cost or low cost services.
So, do you have any final tips for our listeners?
Is to start early, to start early and to engage in your family while you are alive, while you are physically and mentally capable of making that decision. I would encourage people to start now because what I often experience is when someone passes on, we see the dumpster. in the back. Photographs with, empty faces. People don't know who these photographs are. There's a sense of guilt that people have, like, this must be somebody that I know, but they really don't know who these people are. So photo albums are just getting chucked away. Memories that have been held for years and decades, and just to the sheer volume, one is literally shoveling things into the tip with that. So while one is alive, and it's like use the good china. As I said, there was a woman who was in her early 90s and she was moving in with her son. He had purchased a home and they were going to move his mom into the home. So she was leaving the family home. All the kids were born there, going through her china cabinet. And her wedding china was there. It was in the original Woodward's department store box, never opened. So I asked her, "Why aren't you using this china?" And she said, "Oh, it's too good to use." So my question to her is, when are you going to be good enough? So use the good china. It's there to be used, there to be enjoyed, so that your grandkids are having a tea party with the real teacups and saucers. That's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember the plastic, sorry, IKEA, the plastic tea set. It's those memories that is what's going to be held to heart as opposed to the possessions in the end, which can be quite the burden.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
You're
Linda,
very welcome.
for joining
Thank you.
us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered individual legal, financial, or tax advice. Make sure to consult the advisor of your choice to advise you on your own circumstances. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Your Estate Matters. If you like this podcast, make sure to follow it on your podcast platform of choice.
Whether you are planning your own estate or you're acting as executor for somebody else's, Heritage Trust can help. Partner with Heritage Trust to protect your family, your assets, and your legacy.
If you would like more information about Heritage Trust, please visit our website at heritagetrustcompany.ca.
This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.